My name is Isabella Warren. I'm 32 years old, born and raised in Charleston, South Carolina, a city that smells like salt water in the mornings and old magnolia trees in the evenings. For most of my life, I've been the kind of person who lives by promises. I'm the friend who shows up early, the coworker who meets every deadline, the daughter who still calls her mother every Sunday night. I like order, I like certainty, and I believed that love, real love, was supposed to be the most certain thing of all. In 2015, I thought I'd found that. His name, at least the name he gave me, was James. We met in a coffee shop on a Tuesday. I remember the exact table, the chipped corner on its surface, the faint hum of a refrigerator behind the counter. I was sitting there during my lunch break, laptop open, half listening to the rain tapping against the window. He asked if the seat across from me was taken, and something about the way he smiled made me say no before I even thought about it. That one small decision, it changed the course of my life. We talked until my coffee went cold, about travel, about work, about music, about nothing and everything. And before I knew it, I was late returning to the office. He called me later that week. Then the calls turned into dinners, the dinners into weekends. He learned how I took my tea. I learned how he tapped his fingers when he was thinking. It was easy, comfortable, the kind of connection people say you can't force. And when he told me he loved me, I believed him without hesitation. By the end of the year, we were sharing an apartment. It wasn't perfect. Money was tight, work hours were long, but there was something about coming home to him that made the rest of the world feel quieter. My family welcomed him. My friends said, "He's the one, Bella. You're lucky." I thought they were right. We built a life in the small ways people do. Saturday morning grocery runs, swapping playlists in the car, putting off laundry until Sunday night. We took trips when we could afford them. Asheville in the fall, Savannah in the spring. We took pictures everywhere, freezing little moments so we could remember them later. I thought we were building a future. I still remember one night, a little over, and I wanted to believe that. I wanted to believe in him. Because the truth is, when you love someone, you don't go looking for evidence that they might betray you. You protect them in your mind, even from your own doubts. It wasn't until years later that I realized how much I'd ignored. If you're watching this, I want you to understand, Unfaithful Chronicles exists because there are people like me, people who never thought they'd be telling a story like this, and yet here we are. This is not just a story about lies. It's about how easily trust can be broken when you believe it's unshakable. So stay with me, because what I'm about to tell you, it changed everything. When people ask me how we met, I usually tell them the short version. A coffee shop, a rainy Tuesday, a conversation I didn't want to end. But the longer version matters, because it's in those little moments, the ones you almost forget, where the story really lives. It was 2015. I'd been out of college for 3 years, working long hours at a marketing firm downtown. Life was functional. Work, weird, dinner, sleep, repeat. My friends were busy with their own lives, engagements, promotions, moves to new cities. I wasn't lonely exactly, but I felt like I was moving through the weeks without really living them. That Tuesday, I ducked into a coffee shop I didn't usually go to. The air smelled like cinnamon and wet pavement. My hair was damp from the rain, my laptop bag heavy on my shoulder. I remember thinking about the campaign deadline I was behind on. Then, his voice. "Is this seat taken?" I looked up. He was holding a cup of black coffee, a folded newspaper tucked under his arm like something out of another time. His jacket was still beaded with rain, and he had that kind of smile that doesn't demand your attention, but pulls it in anyway. "No," I said. And that was the first decision in a chain I could never take back. We started talking about the weather, harmless, easy. But somehow, within minutes, we were on to music, favorite books, the best road trips we'd ever taken. I told him about my dream to see Italy someday. He told me about hiking trails in North Carolina that could change the way you look at the world. By the time I realized my coffee had gone cold, my lunch break was long over. He wrote his number on a napkin, said, "I hope you use this." And I did. From that day, he was a constant in my life. He didn't just listen when I talked, he remembered. Weeks later, he'd bring up some small detail I'd mentioned in passing, like the name of my childhood dog, or the fact that I liked my tea with honey, not sugar. He had this way of making me feel seen, really seen. We started meeting for dinner after work, sometimes at restaurants, sometimes just takeout on my couch. We'd watch just a Tuesday night. We were barefoot, eating pasta straight from the pot because the dishes were still in the sink. He looked at me and said, "I promise you, forever." It wasn't dramatic, but it was real. At least, it felt real. We didn't exchange rings. Instead, we traded something simple, matching leather bracelets we'd found at a little shop by the pier one weekend. It was our own private vow. No witnesses, just us. From that day, I stopped questioning what we had. I believed in it completely. I believed in him. I didn't know it then, but that forever would turn out to have an expiration date, and the man who promised it would be the one to end it. Looking back now, I can tell you the first cracks didn't come with a loud sound. There was no explosion, no fight, no single moment that screamed something's wrong. It was quieter than that, almost invisible. It started with the nights he came home later than usual. At first, it made sense. A project running over at work, a client meeting that couldn't wait until morning. I believed him. Why wouldn't I? He'd never given me a reason not to. But over time, the explanations became vaguer. I got caught up at the office. Traffic was a mess. I just needed a minute to clear my head. He didn't always kiss me when he walked through the door anymore. Sometimes he went straight to the bedroom to change, or to the kitchen to pour himself a drink before even saying hello. And the phone, that was new. James had never been the type to guard his phone. It used to sit face up on the coffee table when we watched movies. But now, it was always in his pocket, or face down on the counter. He'd step outside to take calls, even in the middle of dinner. I noticed. I told myself not to read into it. He seemed distracted more often. Sometimes I'd be telling him a story about my day and realize halfway through that his eyes were somewhere else, on the television, on his phone, anywhere but me. When I asked if something was wrong, he'd smile that same smile from the coffee shop and say, "No, babe, I'm just tired." I wanted to believe that was all it was. One night, we had plans to meet for dinner after work. Nothing fancy, just our favorite little Italian place on the corner. I got there early, ordered us a bottle of wine, and waited. 20 minutes passed, then 40. I texted him. No reply. An hour later, he walked in, looking different. Not messy, not rushed, just strangely calm for someone who was so late. "Sorry," he said, sliding into the booth. "Got caught up." I laughed it off, but then I asked, just lightly, "Doing what?" And for the first time, his answer didn't feel like an answer. "Work stuff. You wouldn't care about the details." It was the way he said it, not the words themselves, but the tone. Not defensive exactly, but distant, like there was a wall between us I hadn't noticed being built. The strange thing about doubt is that it doesn't arrive all at once. It seeps in, a drip here, a whisper there, until one day you realize you're holding your breath more than you're breathing. For me, the shift from unease to suspicion came one Saturday afternoon. I was out for coffee with my friend Claire, someone who'd known James almost as long as I had. We were sitting outside, the sun catching on her sunglasses, when she said it without thinking. "Oh, I saw James the other night," she smiled. "Looked like he was in a hurry. I waved, but I don't think he saw me." "Where?" I asked, trying to sound casual. She hesitated just a second too long. Near the waterfront, outside that new wine bar." The thing was, James had told me he was working late that night, and James didn't drink wine. I laughed it off in front of her, told her she must have been mistaken, but inside, something tightened. A few days later, I was doing laundry when I found a receipt crumpled in the pocket of his jacket. It was from a restaurant I'd never heard of, dated for a night he'd claimed to be stuck at the office. I stood there in the laundry room, holding that little slip of paper like it weighed 100 pounds. I told myself there had to be a reasonable explanation. Maybe it was lunch with a client. Maybe someone else picked the place. But why hadn't he mentioned it? I put the receipt back in his pocket, like it had never been found, because the truth was, I didn't want to know. Then came the breaking point, though I didn't realize it at the time. We had been planning a weekend trip for weeks, just the two of us, up in the mountains. I'd booked the cabin, mapped the hiking trails, even picked a bottle of wine for our first night. The night before we were supposed to leave, James walked in late, his tie loose, his eyes avoiding mine. "Something came up," he said. "Work?" I asked. He nodded. "Yeah, I can't get away this weekend." I can still feel the way my chest sank. That trip wasn't just a vacation. It was supposed to be a reset, a reminder of who we were together. I didn't argue. I didn't accuse. I just said, "Okay," and turned away so he wouldn't see. The night it happened, there was no warning. No voice in my head telling me to turn around. No strange feeling in my chest, just another Thursday. James had told me he'd be working late again. I decided to use the time to run errands, groceries, a stop at the pharmacy. As I was heading home, my phone buzzed. It was a message from Claire. No words, just a single photo. It took me a moment to process what I was seeing. The image was grainy, taken from across the street, but there he was, James, sitting outside at a restaurant I'd never been to, leaning forward across the table, smiling in that familiar way, but not at me. The woman with him had her hand resting over his. My chest felt tight, my fingers cold around the phone. I read the timestamp on the photo, 10 minutes ago. The restaurant was only a few blocks from where I was. I don't even remember making the decision to go. In a moment I was staring at the picture, the next I was standing on the sidewalk across from that same restaurant. The glow from the patio lights spilled out onto the street. I could hear the faint clink of glasses, the low hum of conversation. And there they were, right in front of me, laughing over shared plates like they'd done it 100 times before. I stood frozen, watching, the way his shoulders relaxed, the way he leaned in just a little closer, the way he looked at her, not like a stranger, not like a friend, but like someone he belonged to. Something inside me went very, very still. I walked across the street. I didn't feel my feet hitting the pavement. I didn't hear the cars passing. All I could hear was my own heartbeat, heavy and sharp in my ears. When I stopped at the edge of their table, his smile faltered. Her hand slipped away from his. "Bella," he said, his voice low, as if saying my name softly would somehow make this less than what it was. I didn't look at her. I looked at him and asked the only question that made sense in that moment. "Who is she?" He hesitated, just long enough to tell me the answer without words. "She's a friend," he said finally. I almost laughed. A friend. Friends don't hold hands in candlelight. Friends don't meet in places you never mentioned to the person you promised. The first night after I saw him, I didn't sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, replaying every second of what I'd witnessed. The curve of his smile, the way his hand stayed still under hers, the pause before he called her a friend. The clock glowed in the dark. 2:11, 3:47, 5:02. Each hour felt like a lifetime. My chest felt hollow, like someone had carved something out of me and left the space behind to echo. By morning, I realized I hadn't eaten since lunch the day before. The thought of food made me sick. Even coffee, my one constant, sat untouched on the counter, growing cold. My phone lit up over and over. Claire checking in, my sister sending heart emojis, a friend offering to come over with wine and bad movies. I answered no one. I wasn't ready to speak the words out loud, because speaking them would make them real. Everywhere I looked, I saw him. The jacket hanging by the door, the one I'd bought him for Christmas. The empty mug in the sink, the one he always used for his late-night tea. Even the bracelet on my own wrist, its leather worn smooth with time, felt heavier than I could bear. That afternoon he came home. No flowers, no frantic explanations, just a quiet, almost careful, "Can we talk?" We sat in the living room, the air between us cold and sharp. "I'm sorry," he said. 2 words, no details, no timeline, just that. I asked him how long it had been going on. He looked down at his hands and said, "It's not what you think. It's not what you think." Those words hit me harder than the photo, harder than seeing them together, because it meant he was still choosing to hide behind excuses instead of telling me the truth. When I pressed him, his voice got sharper. "You've been distant too, Bella. It's not like everything was perfect between us." Blame. In the middle of my heartbreak, he was handing me pieces of his guilt to carry. I remember feeling tears sting my eyes, but I wouldn't let them fall in front of him. Not this time. That night, after he went to bed in the guest room, I sat alone in the dark with my journal. I wrote everything I was afraid to say out loud. I didn't just wake up one day healed. The pain lingered, like a shadow that refused to leave no matter how much light I tried to let in. Some mornings, I'd open my eyes and for a split second, I'd forget what had happened. And then it would hit me all over again, that heavy, hollow ache in my chest. I learned quickly that moving on wasn't about pretending it never happened. It was about learning to live with the scar and letting it remind me of my own strength instead of my loss. At first, I tried to make sense of it, to find some neat little answer that would explain why he did it. But there was no answer that could make betrayal feel less like betrayal. And eventually, I realized I didn't need one. The hardest lesson in all of this was that forever isn't a word you give lightly. Forever is only real if both people mean it, and both are willing to fight for it, every single day. A promise is just noise if it's not backed up by action, by consistency, by truth. And love? Real love doesn't make you doubt yourself. It doesn't make you feel like you're not enough. I want anyone listening to me right now to remember something. If something feels wrong, don't dismiss it. Trust that little voice inside you, the one that whispers in the quiet moments when no one else is around. That voice is there to protect you. And please, never settle for someone who makes you question your worth. Your heart is not a convenience store where people can stop in when it suits them. You deserve someone who keeps their word, even when it's hard. Someone who loves you out loud, every single day, not just when it's easy. I thought forever meant him. Now I know, forever means me. After everything was said, after the apologies that sounded hollow and the promises that came too late, I thought I'd reached the end of the story. I thought walking away would be the final page. But it wasn't, because the truth is, what he did after I left him was worse than anything I could have imagined while we were together. It was the kind of thing that made me realize that leaving wasn't just about saving my heart. It might have been about saving myself entirely. I'll never forget the day I found out. The moment the phone rang, the way my hands shook before I even answered, and the voice on the other end, telling me something that made my chest tighten in a way no breakup ever could. That's when I knew my story with him wasn't finished. It was just changing into something darker, heavier, and far more dangerous than I'd ever thought possible. But that's a whole other story. And if you think what I've told you tonight was hard to hear, wait until you hear what came next. because some endings aren't really endings. They're just the start of something you never saw coming. And I'll tell you all about it next time.